Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the hidden and legendary bosses of Elden Ring, the creatures, ancient horrors, and forgotten warriors that the game never told you about, never pointed you toward, and never wanted you to find. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. Astel, Naturalborn of the Void. There is a moment in Elden Ring that the majority of players will simply never reach. It lives behind a wall of requirements so specific, so deeply optional, so far removed from the things the game asks of you on its main path, that the average player moving through the story from beginning to end will finish the entire experience without knowing it exists. It requires following a quest line through layers of an NPC's trust, descending through underground cities that most players only briefly visit, crossing a lake of scarlet rot that spreads in every direction, like a wound the world cannot close, navigating through a grand cloister of insect-haunted ruins, where every inch of the floor seethes with the quiet horror of organic decay. And at the end of all of it, at the southernmost point of the lake of rot, near a waterfall that drops into absolute darkness, there is a coffin. An empty wooden coffin, sitting at the edge of the drop, surrounded by nothing but the ambient hiss of rot and the faint shimmer of the lake reflecting its own terrible light. And if you climb into it, if you commit to that small act of trust, the game lifts you and carries you somewhere else entirely. The coffin tips forward. You fall. The darkness of the shaft gives way to more darkness, and then to a different kind of darkness, one that has depth and texture, and the faint suggestion of enormous space beyond. And when you finally emerge, you are standing in a corridor of carved stone, and ahead of you is a fog wall. But the fog wall is not the thing you look at first. The thing you look at first is what is above it. Because above the fog wall, visible even through the stone ceiling of the corridor, is a sky. Not a ceiling painted to look like a sky. Not an illusion. An actual sky blazing with stars, stretching to a vastness that seems physically impossible for something so many miles underground. You stand in a corridor deep beneath the lake of rot, and there is a sky above you full of stars. On the other side of the fog wall, Astel, Naturalborn of the Void, is waiting in an arena that might be the most beautiful space in the entire game. It is enormous. It is lit from above by the star-covered sky that hangs over it like the memory of something stolen. The floor is a shallow lake that catches the starlight and throws it back in long silver ribbons. And the chamber walls are so distant, they are almost invisible in the darkness at the edges of all that stellar glow. There is a quality of ceremony to the space, of a room designed to contain something significant, something that deserves an appropriate frame. And at the far end of this starlit underground sea, crouching in the shadows at the chamber's back wall, is a creature that makes no sense and makes perfect sense simultaneously. Astel is alien in the most literal possible meaning of that word. Its body is enormous and insectoid, long-limbed and plated in what appears to be compressed mineral matter, the kind of dense crystalline substance that forms when something has been under extraordinary pressure for a very long time. Or, as the lore suggests, when the shattered debris of ancient stars coalesces into a shape that borders on the organic. It has wings that fold in the manner of something designed to travel through vacuum rather than air. It has a carapace that seems to have been assembled from asteroid material, from the compressed rock and metal and frozen gas of deep space given living form. And it has a head that is wrong in the way that a thing is wrong when it is almost right. The head is nearly human. The proportions are off. The features are present, eyes a structure that suggests a face, the suggestion of expression. But they sit on the wrong body attached to the wrong creature. Part of something that should not be capable of looking at you the way this thing looks at you. And around and across its form, attached in places where nothing should be attached, are hands. Multiple human-shaped hands, scattered across its body like afterthoughts, articulating independently with a thoughtful, deliberate quality that suggests each of them is doing something, or preparing to do something, or thinking something that the main body has not yet decided. To understand Astel, what it is, why it is here, what its presence in this particular underground location means, you have to understand what happened to the eternal cities that lie buried beneath the lands between. There are two of these dead civilizations that the base game makes accessible. Nokron, the Eternal City, reached through a meteor-created path in Limgrave after a specific questline step, and Noxtella, the city beneath the Lake of Rot, through which you just travelled to reach Astel's arena. Both cities share a quality that becomes more striking the longer you spend in them. They are underground cities built to appear as if they are not underground at all. They have full skies, artificial star fields constructed with sorcery or mechanical ingenuity, covering the ceilings of their great caverns with the appearance of a night sky complete enough to create the impression of standing outside on a clear evening. The cities of the Nox were built to look like they had a sky because the people who built them could not bear to be in a place that did not, because the actual sky was taken from them, and Astel is the reason why. The remembrance of the Naturalborn, the item dropped by Astel on death, describes it plainly. A malformed star born in the lightless void far away that once destroyed an eternal city and took away their sky. The weapon description for the bastard stars, one of the rewards that can be made from this remembrance, tells us more. That Astel is far beyond the lands between, a creature coalesced from the debris of ancient stars in the greater will's lightless abyss. It is not a being that was designed by anyone in the lands between. It is a being that formed the way disasters form, accumulating out of the scattered wreckage of celestial violence until it had enough mass and direction to be described as a creature, a Naturalborn of the void. And at some point in the deep past, it fell, a falling star of ill omen. It arrived in the lands between like a weapon fired from so far away that firing it is indistinguishable from a cosmic event. And when it arrived, it did not destroy the eternal cities outright. It buried them. It sealed them underground with a barrage of meteors, separating them from the true night sky permanently, condemning the people of those cities to live for the rest of their existence in an underground world that they decorated with full stars because the real ones were no longer accessible to them. This was punishment. The Nox, the people of the eternal cities, did something to invoke the ire of the greater will, the distant and cold intelligence that manages the golden order from somewhere beyond comprehension. What exactly they did is left in the ambiguity that this game's lore prefers, but the mimic tear ashes, describing these silver creatures as the result of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord, point toward the Nox having tried to create their own divine sovereign, a lord of night who would challenge or replace the greater will's authority. Whether their crime was specifically this act of lord forging, or the use of the Fingerslayer blade to sever the greater will's connection to the lands between, or something else entirely, is left unresolved. What we know is that they reached towards self-determination in a way the greater will could not tolerate, a refusal to accept external authority as the defining principle of their existence. And the response was Astel, A weapon chosen, or perhaps simply appropriate, deployed from the void, arriving to seal the transgressing civilization in the dark and take away the sky that represented their freedom from below-ground limitation. The false stars are defiance made permanent. They are the Nox refusing to accept that what was taken could not be replaced. They built their own sky. Not the same sky, a painted sky, a constructed sky, a sky made by mortal hands rather than by whatever force arranged the stars above the surface world. But a sky nonetheless. And the fact that these cities still have their full starlight when you walk through them, centuries or millennia after they were buried, tells you something about how deeply the Nox committed to that act of reconstruction. They made something permanent out of the refusal to be without it. What makes Astel's presence in this arena so layered is the quest line that leads you here. You reach Astel through Ranni the Witch, the silver-haired, doll-embodied Empyrean who rejected the fate the Greater Will chose for her and has been working for centuries to undo the divine authority of her supposed master. Ranni's questline takes you through the ruins of the very civilizations that the Greater Will's punishment created, using the tools and knowledge of the punished against the punisher. The Fingerslayer blade, the key item that unlocks Ranni's path forward, is a weapon designed to harm the Greater Will's instruments, found in the ruins of Nokron. The Eternal Cities built things that could wound gods, and Ranni is using them. Astel is guarding the elevator to the Moonlight Altar, the place where Ranni's plan reaches its culmination, the location she has been guiding you toward through the entire arc of her quest line. The creature that was sent to take the sky from people who wanted freedom is standing between a woman who refuses the authority that sent it and the next step in her liberation. The instrument of punishment, defending the interests of the punisher, blocking the path of the one who will not be subject to that punishment, and you, the tarnished, operating in service of a plan that the Greater Will would certainly consider transgressive. Fight the creature in an arena under the false stars that are themselves a monument to the act of transgression that brought Astel here in the first place. In the fight, Astel is disorienting in a way that feels intentional beyond the combat design. It teleports constantly, crossing the great length of the arena in an instant, appearing behind you or above you, with the fluid wrongness of a creature that does not experience physical space the way living things experience it. It grabs, and the grab is among the most feared attacks in the game. A single moment of misreading that translates immediately into being devoured, into an instant death cinematic that the game uses to communicate something about the asymmetry between you and this thing. It calls meteors from the false sky above, because that is what it was made for. And seeing those meteors fall inside the star-covered arena is a specific and beautiful kind of terrible. It reaches for you with those scattered human hands, and there is something in the reaching that is worse than the rest of the fight. Something about those hands that suggests a kind of attention the creature should not have. The gravity attacks Astel uses, the wave that lifts you from the ground, the slam that drives you back into it, are the same class of power that Radahn wielded to hold the stars in place. This connection is worth sitting with. The Star Scourge Heirloom's description tells us that Radahn learned gravity magic from an alabaster lord while studying in Sellia, and that he ultimately used it to pin the stars themselves in place. A feat of cosmological force expressed through sorcery. Both Radahn and Astel are, in their different ways, beings whose power relates to the movement and pull of celestial objects. The Alabaster Lords who taught Radahn arrived from beyond the lands between, Astel itself was born from the debris of ancient stars. The gravity magic that runs through this game's history, in the Alabaster Lords, in Radon, in Astel, seems to point outward toward whatever lies beyond the sky. When Astel throws you into the air with a gravity wave, it is doing what a falling star does. You are experiencing, at a personal scale, what the Nox experienced when Astel arrived. The arena's star-covered ceiling also responds to the fight in ways that attentive players have noted. The meteor barrages Astel calls down appear to emerge from the full sky, from the stars the Nox built. The guardian of their sky's absence is using their memorial as his weapon. Whether this is an intentional design statement or simply the most visually appropriate place for the meteors to originate, the effect is the same. The substitute sky that the Nox constructed in defiance of what was taken from them is, during this fight, being turned against you by the thing that took it. Defiance weaponized. The act of reconstruction made into a source of harm. It is either devastating irony or the game's environment simply functioning as designed, and it does not particularly matter which, because the image is the same either way. After Astel falls, the arena is silent. The stars above keep burning. The lake below keeps reflecting them. You take the elevator that Astel was guarding, and Rani's path continues, and the game eventually reaches the Age of Stars ending if you follow it all the way through. An ending in which the moon replaces the Erd Tree as the world's guiding light, in which a new age begins under a sky that belongs to Rani, rather than to the greater will. The Eternal Cities, one interpretation suggests, would finally have their sky back, not the same sky, but a sky that was chosen rather than assigned, governed by a will that did not punish them for wanting their own version of divine law. There is a quiet consolation in that reading, if you allow yourself to sit with it. The item that can be crafted from the remembrance of the Naturalborn, the bastard stars, a flail weapon whose head is a cluster of miniature celestial bodies, carries a description that adds one more layer to what Astel is. It calls the weapon a malformed star, and notes that such stars are born in the lightless void. The word malformed is doing specific work there, not a star that was made and then damaged. A star that formed incorrectly from the beginning, that coalesced from destruction rather than from the clean nuclear processes that make functional suns. Astel is cosmological refuse made ambulatory, the debris of things destroyed, organized by gravity into something that moves and kills and acts as a tool of divine authority. That the greater will uses something like this as an instrument of punishment tells you something about the greater will's relationship to what it creates and what it discards. There is also the matter of the second Astel. Astel, Stars of Darkness, waits in the Yellow Annex tunnel in the consecrated snowfield, accessible only through a specific stone-sword key gate in that dungeon, reachable only if you are thorough enough about a region that most players move through quickly. The existence of a second Astel, bearing the name Stars of Darkness rather than Naturalborn of the Void, suggests that these creatures are a type rather than an individual, not a unique horror deployed once for a specific punishment, but a category of weapon. Cosmic instruments, numerous enough to be dispatched to multiple locations, available to the greater will as a recurring tool of enforcement. The scale of what that implies: a void containing multiple malformed stars, each one capable of sealing civilizations underground and taking their sky, sits at the outer edge of what this game's lore asks you to contemplate. Astel is not exceptional. Astel is standard, and what it did to the Eternal Cities was routine. What stays with you descending back through the grand cloister and the lake of rot, and the eternal cities with their beautiful artificial heavens, is the specific image of the creature that stole the sky, lying in the ruin of the starlit arena it guarded. The stars it was sent to take. The stars the Nox built anyway. The stars that outlasted the guardian of their absence, still burning in the underground, still testifying to something that could not be entirely taken away. The triple chariot of Auriza. Most players driving toward the golden capital of Lendil keep their eyes on the prize. The city draws attention upward and forward. The tremendous canopy of the Erd tree casting gold across the upper districts, the towers and ramparts of something that was, before the shattering, genuinely magnificent. The main path into Lendil funnels you through gates and up ramps, and eventually delivers you to the city's outer wards, and the game's momentum is designed to carry you along that path. The eastern cliffs of the capital outskirts, where the ground drops away toward the cliff face and a lift sunk into the stone descends into rock, are easy to leave unexplored. There is nothing there that the game draws attention to. No grace summoning you, no obvious structure promising reward. But there is an elevator, and it goes down. The site of grace at the bottom is called Auriza Hero's Grave, and you have barely registered the name when the sound starts. A low grinding weight, mechanical and rhythmic, coming from somewhere ahead and below. Then the chariot comes around the corner. It is enormous, a wheeled engine of dense iron fitted with long blades extending from its axle, one on each side, and it is rolling down a stone ramp with the indifference of something that does not have any feelings about whether you survive its passage. There is a shallow alcove cut into the wall of the ramp, the kind of architectural feature that only makes sense as a place to press your back against while something very large passes very close. You press yourself into it. The chariot thunders past. The blades sweep the air at the height of your head. You exhale, and then you hear a second one, lower down, on the next ramp, and then a third. Heroes' graves are the sacred burial tombs of the lands between's greatest warriors, and the chariot trap is their signature. Ancient guardian machines that protect the inner chambers from those who are not worthy, not skilled, not patient enough to understand the mechanism they are navigating. The principle is honest in its way. The tomb demands something. The chariot is the demand made physical. But the other heroes' graves have one chariot, or two on different ramps that do not overlap. Auriza is different. Auriza has 3 chariots that operate on interlocking systems, whose paths cross and interact, whose timing creates a situation where no single alcove is safe from every possible angle simultaneously. The first time you see all 3 operating at once, the feeling is something close to comedy. They are going to kill you. They are going to kill you many times. And the reason they are going to kill you many times is that you are not yet thinking about the dungeon the way the dungeon is asking to be thought about. Auriza is not a dungeon to be brute forced. It is a dungeon to be understood. The architecture has logic, and the logic runs deeper than the ramps and the alcoves and the obvious chariot paths. There is a secondary level to Auriza, a network of wooden beams threading through the space beneath the main ramps, reachable only by specific drops from specific points on the main corridor. These beams pass through rooms that the chariots cannot reach. Low-ceilinged passages, cramped chambers, spaces designed for something other than the grand funerary processions the upper ramps were built for. Through these rooms, past the basilisks that guard them with their instant death eye beams, past poison pits that the beams allow you to navigate above, there is a path. And at the end of the path is a fire-breathing stone pillar that has been sitting dormant in a side corridor that the chariot system services from the opposite direction. Hit the pillar, it extends into the path. And the third chariot, arriving from above on its predetermined cycle, strikes the extended pillar and is thrown into the convergence point at the bottom of the main ramp at precisely the moment when the other two chariots are also passing through it. All three machines meet in a single location at the same time, and the collision is everything you could want from a mechanism this elaborate, this patient, this specifically and architecturally prepared. A chain reaction crash that reverberates through the tomb's stone walls and then falls into a silence so complete, it becomes its own kind of sound. The silence after the chariots die is among the most satisfying moments in Elden Ring. The constant grinding threat that defined every second of your time in this dungeon is simply absent, replaced by the ordinary quietness of stone corridors. You can walk the ramps freely. You can look at the architecture without the background anxiety of something large moving toward you. And scattered on the floor at the convergence point, in the wreckage of the Guardian machines, is the complete Tree Sentinel armor set. The golden plate, the great helm, the full regalia of the warriors who stand eternal vigil at the outer gates of Lendl itself. The Tree Sentinel armor in the wreckage of the chariots is the piece of lore that the whole dungeon is built around, because it tells you who is buried in Auriza. Tree Sentinels are not generic Knight-class enemies in the world of Elden Ring. They are specific, the golden-mounted warriors who guard the approaches to Lendl, who embody the Erd Tree's protective authority made physical, who represent in some sense the outermost ring of the Golden Order's visible structure. Their ceremonial appearance, the gold, the scale, the size that suggests something more than human, communicates that what they guard is more than a city. They guard a principle. For one of them to have been buried in a hero's grave of this elaborateness, with 3 guardian chariots and a dual Crucible Knight vigil, suggests someone whose significance extended well beyond the ordinary measure of warrior honors. And the Crucible Knights who guard the final chamber of Auriza, 2 of them, encountered at the same time, the game's first true Crucible Knight duo, are the evidence that narrows the historical context even further. Crucible Knights served Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, in the founding era of the lands between's current order, the age when the Erd Tree was establishing its authority and the Golden Order was being written. They predate the current age's political arrangements. Finding them as the innermost guardians of this Tree Sentinel's tomb suggests the warrior buried here was ancient, connected to Godfrey's era, significant in the founding period, worthy of knights from the first generation of the Golden Order as eternal sentinels. This is a tomb that is maintaining ceremonies that no longer have a context. The shattering happened, the Golden Order fractured. Lendl fell into its strange preserved siege state. The Jarls and factions of the lands between fought each other for the great runes. And deep in the eastern cliffs outside the city walls, the Auriza hero's grave continued. Its 3 chariots rolled. Its dual Crucible Knights stood at attention. Its hidden mechanism waited for someone to find the beams and the pillar and understand what the dungeon was asking. The secondary level of the dungeon, those wooden beams in the dark, also contains items that reward players who explore it, rather than simply racing toward the fire pillar. Consumables, upgrade materials, a stone sword key tucked in the darkness above a poison pit. The dungeon does not merely ask you to solve a puzzle. It asks you to inhabit its lower spaces, to understand them, to move through the architecture at its roots, rather than only on its surface. The person who built Auriza wanted to be certain that the one who earned access to its innermost chamber had not just stumbled onto the solution from above. They had to go into the dark. They had to find the beams, descend to the basilisk rooms, navigate the hidden corridors. The tomb's design is a thoroughness test as much as a skill test. There is a question worth sitting with about what the heroes' graves were originally for. Beyond the obvious function of honouring a warrior, the Chariot Guardians are not merely traps. In the law's framework, they are tests. Specifically, tests calibrated to the standard of the warrior buried within. The logic is that a tomb built for a great warrior should only be accessible to someone capable of meeting that warrior's standard. You should have to earn entry the way the buried warrior earned their greatness. The difficulty of the chariot system is not cruelty for its own sake. It is a statement about what kind of life the warrior inside led, what quality of person they were, what it cost them to become someone whose honor was worth this elaborate preservation. Auriza's 3 chariots, the hardest chariot system in the game, are the tomb's assertion that the warrior inside was exceptional at a level the other heroes' graves do not claim. The heroes' graves as a concept throughout Elden Ring are tombs that outlasted the civilizations that built them. And Auriza is the most extreme expression of that quality. The other heroes' graves you find across the lands between are elaborate and dangerous in their own rights, but their relationship to the current world is legible. You know roughly what era they come from, what kind of warrior they honored, what the Erdtree's authority meant to the people who built them. Auriza's Crucible Night Guardians push its historical context further back than that. These are beings from before the current form of the Golden Order existed. Their presence as guardians implies a tomb sealed in an era whose relationship to the present is not straightforward linearity, but something more like depth. Not what came before the current age in time, but what lies beneath it, foundationally, in the sense of what the current age was built on top of. You earn it. The silence of the fallen machines, the golden armor in the wreckage, the last descent to the fog wall. All of it is Auriza paying out what it has been holding in trust for however long it has been running its guardian cycles in the dark. The warrior buried beyond the Crucible Knights has been here since before the world broke. The knights standing vigil over them have been here since before anyone now living can remember. And the chariots ran back and forth in the dark for centuries, grinding the stone of the ramps a little smoother with every pass, maintaining the tomb's integrity with the diligence of machines that have no instruction to stop. The putrid avatar of Caelid. Caelid is where Elden Ring goes wrong in the most extraordinary way. The red and arterial browns of the rot-blighted landscape communicate damage at a scale that exceeds any individual cause, which is of course the point. Caelid is the site of the most catastrophic battle in recent Elden Ring history, the legendary confrontation between Starscourge Radahn, the gravity-wielding champion of Caelid, who had contained the stars themselves with his power, and Malenia, Blade of Miquella, who is perhaps the single most dangerous individual in the lands between. Their battle culminated in Malenia releasing the scarlet rot within herself, a detonation of divine disease so total that it consumed an entire region, burning through everything in its radius without distinction between enemy, ally, environment, or sacred structure. The rot did not distinguish, it spread, and Caelid became what it is, a permanent record of that detonation, a landscape still showing the wounds from a catastrophe that ended when both combatants were effectively removed from the field. Everything in Caelid lives in the aftermath of that release. The creatures have adapted to the rot, or been changed by it, or been destroyed by it, and replaced by things that evolved to fill the rot-blighted ecological space. The architecture is compromised, the ground is compromised, and at the northwestern edge of this region, east of the smouldering church, and visible from the highway that cuts through the red plains, a minor tree stands. These smaller divine trees are scattered throughout the lands between, connected to the tree's root system, radiating a diminished but genuine sacred light. The one in Caelid still stands. Its golden light is present, if compromised at the edges, tainted with something that should not be there, and standing before it, with the absolute devotion of a being that has no other mode, is a putrid avatar. The Erdtree avatars emerged in the aftermath of the shattering of the Elden Ring. When the ring broke and the Golden Order collapsed, the Erdtree and its lesser reflections, the minor Erdtrees, were left without the protective divine authority that had previously maintained them. And so, the avatars were born. Large, headless, stump-bodied creatures fashioned from the Erdtree's own substance, each one standing watch over a minor Erdtree, carrying a great staff carved in the shape of the Erdtree's crown, capable of wielding the incantations of golden holy light that the Erdtree's power enables. Their headlessness is their most striking physical quality, and it communicates something about the nature of pure function, a being that exists entirely for its purpose, that has no face to arrange in expression, no gaze to direct at anything except the threat to what it guards. The Caelid avatar is the corrupted variant, the putrid avatar, and its corruption is entirely the product of what happened to the minor Erdtree it guards. The scarlet rot that millennia's detonation spread through the region reached the tree and worked through it. The rot that changed the landscape, the creatures, the water, and the air of Caelid changed the tree as well. And the avatar born to protect the tree changed with it. Where other avatars channel golden holy light, the putrid avatar channels scarlet rot. The staff attacks that were designed to project divine grace now spread clouds of the disease. The ground slams that were meant to send holy shockwaves through the earth now produce geyser bursts of rot that fill the accumulation bar of anyone standing nearby. The avatar has been transformed from the outside in, the corruption seeping through the connection between creature and ward until the creature and the ward reflect each other's damaged state. What makes this encounter genuinely haunting, rather than simply difficult, is the nature of the transformation. The putrid avatar has not become malicious. It has not gained new intent, or adopted a new purpose, or ceased to be what it was made to be. It is still guarding. It is still serving the tree behind it. It is still performing the function it was created for with the same total devotion that an undivided creature performs its function. The rot has changed the method, but not the motivation. And the avatar cannot know this. It does not have the capacity to compare what it was projecting before the rot reached it with what it is projecting now. Because that kind of comparative awareness requires a perspective outside the immediate present, requires something like memory or reflection, or the ability to feel that something has gone wrong. The avatar has none of these. It has only the guardianship, expressed now through the disease that has replaced the grace in the tree's center. This is, in a very specific way, the tragedy of the avatars as a class. They are beings of pure function in a world where the function they were built for has been catastrophically disrupted. The shattering removed the divine order that sustained what they guard. The rot removed the sacred quality of what this specific avatar guards. And neither of these facts reaches an entity that exists only in the present tense of its duty. The putrid avatar stands before a diseased tree and guards it with disease power. And from the avatar's perspective, if perspective is even the right word for what it has, nothing has changed. The tree is still here. The guardian is still here. the duty is still being performed. It is worth noting that putrid avatars are not exclusive to Caelid. A second one guards the minor Erd tree in Graol's Dragon Barrow, the elevated region of the most ancient and powerful dragons, where even the rot-blighted sky carries a different weight. A third is found in the consecrated snowfield, the hidden region accessible only through the secret medallion, and a fourth within Miquella's Halig tree itself, the most hidden putrid avatar guarding a corrupted tree within a sacred tree that was built precisely to resist the kind of damage that produced putrid avatars in the first place. The Halig tree having a putrid avatar inside, it tells you something devastating about Miquella's project. Even the tree he grew as sanctuary, the tree explicitly designed to offer an alternative to the Erd tree's corrupted grace, was not immune to the spread of what millennia carried. Miquella's twin brought the rot into the very structure built to shelter the world from it. The putrid avatar inside the Halig tree is the final evidence of how complete the damage was, and how much the project cost the family that committed to it. The green-burst crystal tear and the flame-shrouding cracked tear that the Caelid putrid avatar drops on defeat are significant in the broader context of what these tears mean. They are the offerings of the minor Erd trees, the specific blessings of these smaller divine trees, distilled into physical form and usable in the flask of wondrous physic. The fact that this avatar, this diseased, rot-channeling corrupted guardian of a compromised tree, still drops genuine crystal tears on defeat, suggests that the rot has not entirely replaced what the tree produces. Something of the original sacred quality persists, layered beneath the corruption, still capable of generating the specific boons that this particular tree was always meant to produce. Devotion persists past the corruption of the devoted. The cycle of service continues even when the service has been changed beyond recognition. The environment immediately around the Caelid minor Erd tree contributes to this sense of corrupted devotion. The tree itself is not simply standing in open ground. It is rooted in the heart of the rot plain, surrounded by the diseased terrain of Caelid, accessible from the highway, but positioned such that reaching it requires moving toward the rot rather than away from it. The avatar is not protecting something incidental. It is protecting the most significant sacred structure in the most damaged region of the lands between, the one place where the rot spread and the Erd tree's presence overlap without one having eliminated the other. The tree persists in the rot. The rot works through the tree, and the avatar stands at the center of that paradox, unchanged in purpose, utterly changed in expression. There is also something worth noticing in the putrid avatar's specific attack patterns that distinguishes it from the standard Erd tree avatars elsewhere. The regular avatars use holy light offensively, beams, projectiles, the golden slam skill that sends holy shockwaves radiating outward. The putrid avatar replaces much of that holy output with rot, but it does not simply substitute one for the other in a mechanical sense. The rot attacks have a spreading quality, a persistence on the ground after impact, a tendency to follow the player in arcing trajectories that suggest the creature has adapted its hunting methods to the properties of what it now channels. The avatar has become more effective in some ways. The rot is harder to avoid than clean holy light because it lingers. The corruption has, in a twisted sense, improved the guardian's ability to guard, which is the worst kind of irony. Most players who enter Caelid from Limgrave at the natural pace of the game's progression encounter the putrid avatar at a level where it is genuinely threatening. The arena around the minor Erd tree is not spacious. The rot attacks have generous reach and build scarlet rot accumulation quickly. The avatar's slam patterns can catch players who commit to melee at wrong moments and fill the build-up before they realize they are being poisoned. But these are combat details. The image that stays is the one you see when you first approach the minor Erd tree and register what is standing before it. The headless, hollow stump body of a sacred guardian. Scarlet rot leaking from the places where golden light should be. Still doing its job, still standing at its post, still maintaining the exact posture of devoted protection in front of a tree that has been changed into something that should not require protection, but demands it anyway. Ordina, the liturgical town. To reach Ordina, you have to earn it twice over, and the earning has a quality of deliberate challenge that the game builds into its most hidden things. The first layer is the consecrated snowfield itself, a region that most players simply never find, because getting there requires assembling a secret medallion from two pieces hidden in two locations that the game places no markers toward and provides no hints to. One half is held by an old man named Albus, who is hiding in the village of the Albinorics in Liurnia of the Lakes, disguised as a pot in a corner of the village's upper level. Not metaphorically disguised, literally disguised as a pot. You have to roll into it, the way you roll into breakable objects, and when the pot shatters, the old man is there, and he gives you half a medallion and asks you to keep it from those who would misuse it. The other half is locked in a chest on the rooftop of Castle Sol in the mountaintops of the Giants. A castle that most players who reach the mountaintops will enter briefly and then leave when they find the main path forward through the region does not require clearing it. Getting both halves requires thoroughness of a particular kind, the kind that comes from treating every pot in a corner as potentially significant, every castle as potentially containing something worth the detour. With both halves, at the grand lift of Rold, you can switch the elevator's travel to a secret route and descend not to the main mountaintops, but to the consecrated snowfield, a hidden region within a hidden region. The snowfield is a vast blizzard expanse, grey and white and blinding, with visibility so reduced that navigation is more like reading terrain by feel than seeing it. The wind is constant, the landmarks are indistinct, and in the far north, visible through the snow as a cluster of pale buildings emerging from the white, there is a town. Ordina, the liturgical town, appears through the blizzard with a quality of preservation. The buildings are intact. The pathways are clear of the debris that accumulates in Elden Ring's abandoned places. The statues that line the approaches are standing upright, not toppled, not weather-worn beyond recognition. It looks like a place that has been maintained, and in its visible, non-Evergaol state, it is perfectly quiet. No enemies on the streets, no ambient sounds of danger, just the falling snow and the stone and the light of the site of grace inside the town, casting warmth through the cold. The name carries meaning that the physical space supports. Liturgical means connected to sacred ritual, to the prescribed and formal expressions of religious devotion, to the performance of ceremony, according to rules understood by those who participate in it. Ordina is not a residential town or a trading settlement or a military outpost. Every structural choice in its architecture seems oriented towards some particular ceremony. The positioning of the statues, the arrangement of the pathways, the elevated platforms and the stairways between levels. It was built to perform something. What that something was, the empty town does not say directly. The Evergaol at the back of the town changes the register of the whole space. Evergaols throughout Elden Ring are binding structures, eternal prisons that trap their occupants in pocket dimensions outside normal time, and you have likely encountered them as cells for dangerous individuals, sorcerers, outlaws, warriors whose imprisonment served various interests. The Evergaol at Ordina is not a prison for a person. It presents a single instruction when you interact with it. Light the 4 figures in the Evergaol, and when you step onto the binding circle and enter it, you are transported into a shadow version of the town, the same streets, the same buildings, the same statues, but darker, lit differently, and no longer empty. On the rooftops, albinoric archers have materialized. These are first-generation albinorics, the older variety, more capable than the pale-faced beings you encounter elsewhere in the world, armed with bows that fire rapid multi-arrow volleys, positioned at every elevated angle that allows coverage of the streets below. On the ground, invisible black knife assassins move between the statues, their outlines detectable only if you carry a specific torch or watch closely for the shimmer of a form that is present but not quite solid, hunting you through the streets with an aggression that is quiet and immediate. The Black Knife Assassins are historically among the most significant figures in Elden Ring's pre-game lore. They are the killers who carried out the Night of Black Knives, the event in which a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen from Malekith, the Black Blade, and used to craft daggers capable of wounding and killing beings that should have been beyond mortal harm. Godwyn the Golden, beloved son of the Golden Order, was killed that night. Rani the Witch had her immortal soul severed from her mortal body, forcing her to inhabit the doll that she appears in throughout the game. The Night of Black Knives set every subsequent event in motion, including ultimately the Shattering. Finding Black Knife Assassins here, in this town that guards the path to Miquella's Haligtree, connects Ordina to the game's deepest historical conspiracy, in ways that are never made entirely explicit but are impossible to ignore. Miquella's Haligtree is the destination that Ordina guards. Miquella, the most powerful Empyrean in living memory, a demigod capable of enchanting minds with the overwhelming gentleness of his will, devoted himself to growing a sacred tree independent of the Erd Tree, a private divine structure for the people that the Golden Order rejected, the Albinoric, the Rot-afflicted, those cursed or outcast or simply insufficient by the Order's standards. The Haligtree is an act of love expressed as a tree, and Ordina is the last gate before it. The ceremony that the town was built to perform was, one interpretation suggests, the ritual of preparation for entry, a test or dedication that ensured the worthiness of those who sought to approach what Miquella built. The puzzle of lighting the 4 statues takes you across Ordina's rooftops, while the archers track you from every elevation and the assassins hunt the ground below. Each lit candle changes the territorial balance of the space, eliminates one hazard, opens access to the next position. The navigation requires understanding the town's 3-dimensional layout, which rooftops connect, which drops are survivable, which archways and alleyways provide cover from which angles. It is a test of spatial intelligence under sustained pressure. And when all 4 statues are lit and the seal on the sending gate breaks, what you have demonstrated is something like fluency in the town's language. The fact that Ordina is at the edge of everything, at the northern limit of a region that is itself a secret, past a blizzard that blots out direction, requiring a medallion assembled from 2 pieces hidden in 2 different areas, communicates something about what it is guarding. Miquella's Haligtree is not for anyone who arrives by accident. It is for those who went looking, who assembled the hidden key, who crossed the snow-filled blind, who stood in the Evergaol and moved through the dark between the assassins and the arrows, and lit each figure until the way forward opened. The difficulty of Ordina is the sincerity of the gate it is. The Albinoric archers who guard Ordina's Evergaol deserve a moment of attention beyond their function as obstacles. The Albinoric people are one of Elden Ring's most systematically marginalized groups. Beings created through the imitation of life rather than born naturally, regarded by the Golden Order with suspicion, and by much of the world's population with the particular hostility reserved for those who exist outside recognized categories. They were denied entry to Leyndell. They were subject to the kind of systematic disadvantage that does not announce itself as violence but functions as violence in practice. Their presence throughout the lands between is characterized by displacement, by being found on the edges of things, in the villages that are not cities, in the underground passages, in the snowfield at the world's northern margin. Miquella's Halleck tree was built partly for them. It was a place where the rejected could go, and finding them here as the guardians of the path to that place is a specific statement. The people Miquella built the tree for are the ones who keep the approach to it. They guard what was built for their protection. Whether that is protective symmetry or something more complicated, whether being made the guardians of the gate is itself another form of being positioned at the door rather than inside, the game leaves to the player's interpretation. The invisible Black Knife assassins on the ground add a second layer of historical presence to Ordina that the archers alone could not provide. The assassins are among the most conspiratorial figures in Elden Ring's backstory, connected to the Knight of Black Knives and to whoever commissioned it. The party or parties who wanted Godwyn dead, who wanted Ranni's soul separated from her mortal flesh, who set the shattering in motion by removing the barrier that demigod immunity had placed around the possibility of political violence through death. Ranni is often pointed to as the most plausible candidate for having commissioned the assassins. The Knight of Black Knives conveniently served her purposes, freeing her from a fate she rejected. But the game never confirms this directly, and the connection remains one of the more hotly debated interpretations in the community. Finding them here, on the path to Miquella's sacred tree, Miquella shares Radagon as a father with Ranni, making them half-siblings through that lineage. Suggests the circles of the two rejected Empyreans were not entirely separate in their methods or their relationships with the same conspirators. In the falling snow of the normal world, the statues stand where they always stood. The building whose rooftop you climbed stands intact. The sending gate that your ritual lit is quiet now, because you have passed through it. And whatever ceremony Ordina was built to support, whatever the meaning was of gathering in this frozen town at the edge of the world and lighting the figures in the dark, you performed it. Even if you did not know what you were performing, even if the people who originally gave the ceremony its meaning have been gone for longer than anyone can remember. The Nox Duo of Sellia. Sellia, the town of sorcery, sits at the eastern edge of Caelid, in the way that scholars often find themselves at the edge of difficult things. The highway runs east through the rot-blighted land, and if you follow it past the point where most players turn back or push south, you will find the town rising above the plain, a collection of elevated stone platforms and spires connected by ladders and long drops, organized around the practice of sorcery in a way that makes the architecture feel like a working environment rather than a residential one. Scholars needed height for certain kinds of work, apparently. Or the elevation was a statement, or the town's founders had specific reasons for building vertically that we cannot now fully reconstruct. The ghost sorcerers who still haunt its streets, shimmering into visibility at close range, performing the forms of their practices even in their half-existence as echoes, suggest a community that was living and working here in the way that communities do, before whatever happened to Sellia happened. Most players move through Sellia as an obstacle, because most of its interesting content is sealed. The brazier puzzle, 3 fire points on elevated positions that must be lit to dispel the arcane barriers blocking the inner chambers, is simple once understood, but demands careful platforming and attention to the ghost sorcerers who materialize mid-climb. The rewards for solving it include some of the game's best sorcery items, notably the Night Maiden's Mist spell and the Lusar's Glintstone staff, waiting in a chest beyond the boss chamber. But reaching the boss chamber, finding it in the northwestern reaches of the town, past the final brazier, and one last demanding leap. This is something that many players who complete the brazier puzzles still miss, because the chamber is not announced, and the final approach is not obvious from below. Behind the fog wall in that sealed northwestern chamber, 2 figures stand in the quiet of a space that has been sealed for a very long time. The Nox Swordstress and the Nox Monk are warriors of the Eternal Cities, the underground civilizations of Nokron and Noxtella. The Nox, who are buried beneath the lands between as divine punishment, and have been living in the dark ever since. Their presence here on the surface, in a sorcery town at the edge of Caelid, speaks to the dispersal of Nox culture that must have occurred over the long centuries since the burial. Some Nox are underground, some are here, and the ones in Sellia have been maintaining themselves in this sealed chamber, available only to those who understand the town's puzzle language and earn the right to stand before them. The item description for the Nox Swordstress crown tells us that these women are the personal guards of the Night Maidens, figures of authority within the Eternal City's social structure, and that the silk covering their eyes is not a weakness, but a mark of rank and mastery. Warriors who have trained beyond the need for sight in the way that sight usually functions. The Nox flowing sword that the Swordstress drops on defeat is one of the most unusual weapons in the game. It moves in curves, in arcs that bend away from and then back toward the target, and it extends its reach mid-swing in a manner that catches players who assume they had calculated its range correctly. The weapon's design expresses something about the Nox aesthetic: fluid, tidal, combat as something that moves like water rather than something that strikes like stone. The Nox Monk is a caster, working from range, and the weapon that the chest beyond their chamber holds, Lusar's Glintstone staff, connects the Eternal Cities to the game's broader tradition of transgressive magical scholarship. Lusar was one of the founding Grand Masters of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, and one of the most brilliant sorcerers the institution ever produced, and then exiled because his research into the primeval current, the forbidden root tradition of glintstone sorcery, took him further than the Academy was willing to sanction. He hailed originally from Sellia itself, which makes his staff ending up here feel less like coincidence and more like return, the work of a lifetime coming to rest in the town, where the man who created it was born. His staff being here, associated with Nox culture, suggests that the overlap between the Nox tradition and the more daring corners of surface world sorcery was more than stylistic. They were both reaching for the same things: the buried cities that attempted to forge their own lord and reach the primeval current of the stars, and the surface sorcerers who wanted to touch those same stars. The ambitions rhyme. The lore attached to the Nox throughout the game has a quality of suspended hope that becomes more poignant the more of it you read. Long ago, the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will and were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky, in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars, and their lord of night. This is the Nox condition, a community organized around waiting. They believe in a figure, a lord of night, who will come and reverse their banishment, who is connected to the stars and to a future age when the punishment will be undone. This belief sustains their culture across centuries, above ground or below, in the eternal cities with their full star fields, or in sealed chambers at the edge of a rot-blasted plain. They maintain themselves, maintain their traditions, maintain their weapons and their practices, and their anticipation. The swordstress and the monk in Sellia are not simply hiding, they are maintaining. The seal on their chamber is not primarily the brazier puzzle. That is the town's own architecture. Their presence in this specific location suggests intention. They chose a place that was already difficult to access, a place where the town's own sorcery design barriers would ensure that only those who understood the language of sorcery could find them. In a world that has been defined for centuries by the burial and rejection of their civilization, choosing a location that requires knowledge to reach is a kind of sovereignty. You cannot stumble onto the Nox Duo of Sellia. You have to arrive. When you fight them, the swordstress comes for you immediately, pressing the engagement, trying to keep your attention focused on the fluid unpredictability of the flowing sword. The monk repositions to range and uses the distance. And if you ignore him to focus entirely on the swordstress, you will discover that his attacks carry enough weight to be noticed even when something else already has your full attention. They work in coordination, which is not a product of AI routine, but a reflection of their relationship. Two people who have been training together in a sealed chamber, who know each other's methods, who have had nobody else to practice against for long enough that they have become each other's perfect complement. There is one more quality of the Sellia encounter that is worth dwelling in before moving on, and it is perhaps the most atmospheric element of the whole discovery. Sellia itself is a town of ghosts. The sorcerers who haunt its streets are not aggressive in the way that enemies are typically aggressive. They perform, they practice, they go through the forms of their craft in the echo state of their existence. They are not aware of you in the way that living things are aware of things that threaten them. They are aware of the sorcery they were doing when they became what they are. Walking through Sellia is walking through a preserved moment, a town frozen in the act of its purpose. The sealed chamber with the Nox swordstress and Nox monk is the one space in Sellia that is not frozen in that way. They are not ghosts. They are present. They have been here, in this sealed room, maintaining a readiness that is alive rather than echoed, waiting in a town of echoes in the particular way of people who have chosen to keep being alive when the world around them has stopped. The contrast between the ghost sorcerers in the streets and the very real warriors in the inner chamber gives the discovery its specific emotional texture. You have been walking through a world of preserved absence, and then you find a sealed door, and behind it there are people. People who have been waiting in a place full of echoes and have not become echoes themselves. The waiting of the Nox is not passive. It is the active maintenance of anticipation, a practice rather than a condition. They keep the forms, they keep the weapons sharp and the skills current. They maintain the identity of their civilization in a world that buried that civilization and moved on, through the simple persistence of continuing to be what they were made to be. The swordstress keeps her silk over her eyes and her sword in its fluid readiness. The monk keeps his casting forms and his distance management. in a sealed chamber in a ghost town at the edge of the most toxic region in the lands between. The Nox of Sellia practice their devotion to a lord who has not come and maintain their readiness for an age of stars that has not yet arrived. There is a broader context for what the Nox represent in the lands between's history that the Sellia encounter quietly invokes. The eternal cities were built by people who had the ambition and the capability to construct alternatives to the world the Greater Will was imposing. The Mimic Tear Ashes description tells us that the Mimic Tears were the result of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord. The Nox created these silver fluid beings specifically to bring their prophesied Lord of Night into existence. Whether this act of forging a lord was the transgression that earned their punishment, or whether there were other provocations we cannot fully reconstruct from what remains. The item descriptions leave deliberately ambiguous. What we can infer from the severity of the response is that whatever they did threatened the Greater Will's authority in a real and meaningful way. You do not bury a civilization underground for doing something that could not have worked. You bury them because it could have. This means that the Nox in Sellia are not simply remnants of a defeated people. They are, in some sense, evidence of what the world could have been if the Greater Will's authority had not been absolute. Everywhere the Nox appear, in their underground cities, in the occasional surface settlement, in the sealed chamber in the sorcery town at the edge of Caelid. They carry with them the memory of a civilization that reached towards self-determination and was stopped. Not destroyed, stopped. The underground cities still exist. The Nox still live. The full stars still burn. And the swordstress and the monk in Sellia still maintain their readiness for a Lord of Night who represents, in their tradition, the coming of the very self-determination that was suppressed. The distinction between the Nox swordstress and the Nox monk as a pair is worth dwelling on beyond their combat functions. They represent two aspects of the Eternal City's culture, the martial tradition and the scholarly one, the body and the mind of a civilization that developed both to extraordinary degrees. The Eternal Cities were not simply populations of people who used magic. They were societies in which magical scholarship and physical combat training developed alongside each other, mutually informed, producing warriors who moved like water and casters, who built their sorcery toward the stars. The duo is not an arbitrary pairing. They are the two halves of what the Nox were. The weapon descriptions you carry away from the encounter extend this picture. The Nox flowing sword's description tells us it was a weapon of the Eternal City's warriors, its flowing quality tied to the Night Maiden tradition. The monk's staff, recovered from the chest beyond, is an artifact of a different tradition entirely. The surface world's most ambitious sorcerers reaching for celestial power. Together, they represent a civilization that was connected both internally to its own martial and scholarly traditions and externally to the broader history of magical ambition in the lands between. The Nox were not isolated in their underground cities. They were reaching outward, building connections to everyone else who was reaching upward. When the fight begins, it feels like an intrusion in a way that most Elden Ring encounters do not, because most encounters are with things that are already hostile in their orientation. These two were not hostile. They were simply present in their sealed space, doing what they do. You open the door. The fight follows from that, as consequences follow from actions. And when it ends, the chamber is quiet again, and the ghost sorcerers of Sellia continue their practice in the streets outside, and the brazier flames that you lit to reach this room burn on, illuminating a stairway to a chest that holds one of the game's best staffs. waiting for someone who cared enough to stay. In the chest beyond them, Lusa's staff waits, the reward layered beneath the reward. The game doing what it does with its best content, not announcing it, not highlighting it, placing it in the last room of the hardest path and letting the discovery speak for itself. The Fell Twins. There is a door in Elden Ring that most players pass without noticing. It sits in a transitional corridor between the outer districts of Leyndell and the Forbidden Lands that lead to the mountaintops of the Giants. A corridor you use briefly during the progression of the main story, navigating between two elevator connections. The door to the south is easy to interpret as environmental decoration. The walls of Leyndell are full of doors and archways and gates that serve no navigable purpose. This one opens. It opens onto a bridge stretching towards a tower, visible in the grey middle distance, and the bridge has a Leyndell soldier at its entrance with a torch, standing guard in the way that soldiers in this city stand guard everywhere. Patient, armoured, present. Almost nobody goes through the door. The game's momentum is carrying you forward to the mountaintops and everything the game needs you to find there. The Divine Tower of East Altus, where the bridge leads, is optional even for players specifically trying to optimize Great Rune Restoration. Most players have no reason to go through the door. They do not know the door opens. They take the elevator and continue. But the door opens, and the moment you step through it and begin walking out along the bridge, the world does something that Elden Ring almost never does. The sky disappears, not gradually, not with any transition. The world goes completely, absolutely black, not dim, not darkened, but an absolute blackness that replaces everything above and around you with nothing. The Leyndell soldier who was standing guard at the bridge entrance is dead at your feet. He was alive when you stepped through the door. You did not see what killed him. And in the void ahead, two shapes are moving toward you. The Fell Twins are omens. To understand what this means, you need the broader context of what being an omen represents in the social and spiritual structure of the lands between. Omens are humans born with horns curving from their bodies, a physical manifestation of a curse that the Golden Order classifies as a mark of darkness, of spiritual contamination, of a power incompatible with the Erdtree's light. The curse is not chosen. It is simply present at birth, and the Golden Order's response to this curse expresses something fundamental about the institution's priorities. For ordinary omens, the response was to cut the horns. The procedure is described across multiple item texts. Painful, irreversible, performed in the name of making the unacceptable acceptable. The omen who survived the cutting was still marked, still carried the curse, still lived in a society that regarded them with at best suspicion and at worst open rejection. The cutting did not remove the curse or the stigma. It removed the most visible evidence of it. Omens born of noble blood receive different treatment because noble families face political complications from execution. They were hidden rather than altered, sent to the underground tunnels and drainage systems and sealed chambers of Leyndell, imprisoned in the city's maintenance infrastructure, kept alive but kept invisible. The problem preserved rather than resolved. Morgoth lived this life. Mog lived this life. The subterranean shunning grounds beneath Leyndell are the product of this practice. An underground system populated by generations of hidden omens. The Fell Twins complicate this picture in ways that reward close reading of their presentation. They are brothers, both omens by their nature and their appearance. But one has his horns intact, and one has had his horns excised, and if they are twins from the same birth, the reason for this asymmetry should not exist, because whatever lineage determination governed, whether an omen received the cutting or the hidden life, should apply identically to both. Yet it does not. One twin shows the long curving horns of an omen who was deemed too noble to cut. The other shows the scarred residuals of horns removed. Two brothers, born with the same curse, treated by different hands under different rules. The theories this generates are all plausible. Perhaps the determination of noble lineage was close enough that different officials judged differently. Perhaps one twin was taken first and hidden, and the other was taken later, and the family's political circumstances had changed. Perhaps one of the brothers chose the cutting voluntarily. An act of self-erasure, an attempt to become something the Order could acknowledge, looking at his brother's intact horns and making a different decision about what kind of existence he wanted to attempt. The game does not resolve this. It presents the asymmetry and leaves it to mean whatever it means to the player, who looks closely enough to notice it. The physical difference between the two is not the only asymmetry. Their weapons are different. Their sizes are slightly different in ways that suggest different histories of growth and use and exposure to power. And the specific flames they wield are distinct enough to represent genuinely different relationships to what it means to be an omen. The blood flame carried by the shorn twin is associated with Mog's lineage, with the blood curse taken to its fullest expression, with what the omen inheritance becomes when it is not hidden or suppressed but drawn out and amplified. The wraith light of the intact twin is associated with death in its gentler, more sorrowful form, with fear's tradition, with the deathbed, with an understanding of mortality that is less about power and more about accumulation. If these two brothers represent something about the range of what omenhood can mean when it is no longer being controlled by the cutting or the hiding, when it is simply allowed to be itself in whatever form it takes, then they represent that range completely. Fire and shadow, blood and grief, the full spectrum of the curse, expressed in two bodies, fighting together in a void that is the color of everything the Golden Order refused to illuminate. The weaponry of the two twins maps onto distinct aspects of the omen inheritance. The twin with excised horns carries a warped axe wreathed in blood flame, the fire of Mog's blood curse, the expression of what omen blood becomes when it is not suppressed but amplified, the ancestral curse channeled into offensive power. The twin with intact horns carries an omen cleaver that he can shroud in wraith light, a darkness associated with the concept of death and its accumulation, with fear the deathbed companion, with the Death Prince following that runs through the game's underground lore. Together they are blood and death, the two things omen existence has most commonly been defined by. The blood curse that marked them at birth, and the proximity to mortality that their cursed existence in the hidden places produced. The arena of the fight, the absolute void, the darkness that replaces the world rather than simply dimming it, generates interpretive pressure that the game does not resolve. Some players believe the void represents a dimensional space connected to the Shadow Realm, the place beyond the veil that the DLC would later reveal. The lore note that omen blood was required to cross the boundary into the Shadowlands gives this reading a specific mechanical plausibility. Others believe it is a metaphysical statement about the omen condition itself. Creatures who have always been kept outside the Erdtree's light, who have never been illuminated by the grace that the Golden Order distributes, fighting in a space that represents the total absence of that illumination. The dark is the truth of what was done to them. The bridge you were walking across is the lie of normality. The void is where they have always been. When the fight ends and the darkness resolves back into daylight and bridgestone and the ordinary grey sky of the capital outskirts, there is a specific beat of reorientation that is particular to this encounter. Most boss fights conclude in their arenas. You deal the final blow, the death animation plays, the golden light of runes awarded fills the screen, and you are still in the boss's space. The Fell Twins' fight concludes somewhere else. The void that replaced the world simply gives it back, and you find yourself standing on the same bridge you were crossing, the same tower visible ahead, the dead torchbearer at your feet exactly where you found him. The world was interrupted and then resumed. The bridge still leads where it led before. Nothing has changed, except that the space between where you were and where you are going is clear now. And whatever the void was has been discharged. The divine tower of East Altus itself, the structure the bridge leads to, the reason anyone would walk through that door, is the only tower in the game that restores two separate great runes rather than one. Both Morgoth's Great Rune and Morg's Great Rune are attuned here to the corpse of the two fingers at the tower's summit. The lore reason for this is direct. Morgoth and Mog are brothers, both omens of the royal lineage, both defined by the same birth curse and the same consequence of that curse in the world they were born into. They share a tower. The divine connection point for both of them is the same location, and the Fell Twins, who guard the approach to that tower, are themselves omens, possibly, one reading suggests, connected to that same royal lineage by blood or by the specific quality of their curse. Whether the Fell Twins are kin to Morgoth and Mog in some direct sense, or simply omens who were given this posting because the tower's purpose required guardians who understood what omenhood means to the architecture of the Golden Order, the game does not resolve. But the symmetry is present. The Tower of the Omen Princes is guarded by Omen Warriors. The place where divine authority is restored for the two most significant Omen-born individuals in the lands between is approached through a void that represents the total absence of that divine authority. You cannot restore these great runes without first confronting what was done to the people who carry them. The darkness comes first. The tower comes after. What gives the encounter its specific weight is the silence of it. There is no preamble, no voice line, no special introduction. The world goes black and they are there. The soldier is dead and you have seen nothing of how. And in the void, with only the blood flame and the wraith light for visibility, two enormous beings who were defined by a curse they did not choose, fight with everything they have in the darkness they have always inhabited. Igon and the fire of Bayle. If there is a single encounter in Shadow of the Erdtree that most completely defines the emotional ambition of the DLC, that demonstrates what the expansion was reaching for beyond the challenge and the spectacle and the expanded lore. It is the questline that ends at the top of the jagged peak, with Igon and Bayle the Dread, and everything it requires you to do to get there. It is found at the end of a chain of discoveries that most players never connect. It requires you to treat a crying man on a road as someone worth stopping for. It requires a leap of faith into a hole that looks like it has no floor. It is accessed through one of the DLC's most remote and difficult environments, and its emotional climax depends almost entirely on a voice performance that has no business being as good as it is. In a game full of extraordinary things, this is the one that people who find it most frequently cite first when asked what they will remember. Igon is near the Pillar Path waypoint, a site of grace southeast of Castle Ensis. You hear him before you see him, because Igon is not quiet about what he is experiencing. In a game whose sound design typically distinguishes between enemy vocalizations and ambient environmental sounds, with enough clarity that players learn to ignore the latter. Igon's cries have a quality that does not let themselves be ignored. There is something specific in them, a register of actual suffering filtered through something else, something that is fighting the suffering rather than yielding to it. When you find him on the road, collapsed, barely functional, his body bearing the unmistakable evidence of having been through something that should have killed him, he will tell you about Bayle the Dread. He does not say the name the way people say the names of things they fear. He says it the way you say the name of something you have organized your survival around the destruction of. There is no fear in it. There is hatred, specific and total, refined over a long time into something with edges. And the way the voice actor delivers that name, the particular weight he gives to it, the exhaustion threaded through the fury, tells you more about Igon in those first moments than most game characters reveal over entire quest lines. His history is assembled from his dialogue, his armor and weapon descriptions, and the information the Dragon Communion Priestess shares if you find her on the jagged peak's southern slopes and exhaust her dialogue before completing the quest. Igon was a battlefield scavenger. He survived by moving through the aftermath of other people's violence and collecting what they left behind. From this beginning, which the game describes without sentimentality as simply the lowest possible starting position, he found the Dragon Communion, this ancient practice by which hunters of dragons consume the hearts of their kills and absorb their power, predates the Erd Tree and the Golden Order and the current age's political arrangements. It was always a tradition for those willing to hunt the most dangerous prey in the world in exchange for the most dramatic form of power available to mortals. Igon became good at it. The item description for his helm tells us that he became a fearless Drake warrior, climbing through the Communion's hierarchy of kills until he set his eyes on the one the whole tradition was originally designed to reach, Bayle the Dread, progenitor of the Drakes, the origin point of the lineage that Dragon Communion was created to eventually hunt. And Igon went to the jagged peak and challenged Bayle and found himself outmatched. The man lying on the road, barely able to speak, body organized by spite rather than health. This is what outmatch looks like when the person who was outmatched refuses to accept it. To reach Bayle yourself, you go south from Igon's position on the road to the Dragon's Pit, a dungeon accessible through the landscape southeast of Castle Ensis. The pit is a cave system populated by Drake variants and navigable by careful aggression management, culminating in a boss fight against the ancient Dragon Man, a humanoid enemy who has achieved something unusual through devotion to draconic power. A warrior who fights with the forms of ancient dragon combat, expressed through a human body. Defeating the ancient Dragon Man is itself a gate. Without it, you cannot proceed through the rest of the dungeon. And at the end of the Dragon's Pit, the path runs out. There is a hole in the floor. It is surrounded by nothing. There is no indication that it connects to anything. Every conventional reading of Elden Ring's environmental design says this is a gap in the geometry, a fall to your death, something to avoid. Every conventional reading is wrong. You jump. The darkness goes on long enough to make you question the decision. And then you land in a new space, the jagged peak, one of the DLC's most dramatically realized environments, a bare stone mountain of knife-edge ridges and vertiginous drops, where drakes patrol and fight and nest, with the territorial intensity of creatures that have lived here undisturbed for long enough that the mountain feels genuinely theirs. You climb it, fighting through the drakes, working your way up the ridgelines, crossing a rope bridge above a chasm whose floor is too far below to see clearly, navigating toward the summit through a progression of increasingly large and capable draconic opponents. The jagged peak has a specific environmental quality that rewards attention, even while you are managing the combat. It is genuinely remote. Not in the way that the game's earlier areas feel remote, where remote means away from the main path, but still within a geography connected to everything else. The jagged peak feels remote in the way of a place that did not connect to civilization before civilization had the ability to reach it. The stone is bare and sharp. The wind is constant. The drakes that live here have not been disturbed by anything other than each other for long enough that their territorial behavior has the specific quality of creatures who have not learned to account for things like you. They fight you with a genuine immediacy that the game's more common enemies that have been encountering adventurers since before you arrived, do not quite match. Igon appears again on the mountain, somehow ahead of you, or somehow having made the same impossible journey. Because Igon goes where Igon needs to go, and no mountain is sufficient to stop a man operating entirely on the specific fuel of unresolved grievance. He gives you Igon's furled finger, a summon sign, the means by which you can call him into the final battle. The fact that Igon gives you a summon sign rather than simply accompanying you to the summit is itself a narrative statement. He cannot make the climb alone. He could not before when he first came here, and he cannot now. His body has been broken by what Bayle did to it, but he has positioned himself as close as he can get, and he is trusting you to carry the confrontation to its endpoint so that he can participate in the finish. There is a specific generosity in this. Igon could have simply told you about Bayle and left you to handle it, taken the information giver's distance from the danger. Instead, he follows you across an impossible mountain on a ruined body, gets as far as he can get, and puts his name on a piece of paper so that he can be there when it matters. He does not ask for safety. He asks to be present. Before you use it, before you cross the last threshold to Bayle's arena, there is the Dragon Communion Priestess. She is stationed near the DLC's only Dragon Communion site, in the shadow of the jagged peak. And if you speak to her before killing Bayle, she will give you information that contextualizes everything you are about to do. Bayle the Dread is not merely a powerful dragon. He is the progenitor of the Drake lineage, the original, the source, the one from whom all drakes descend, and whose power the Dragon Communion tradition was always at its deepest level, aimed at eventually consuming. The Communion was created for this moment. Every dragon heart consumed by every Communion practitioner across history was preparation for the eventual hunt of this one creature. Igon is attempting to fulfill the oldest purpose of the tradition he serves. The priestess also tells you about Bayle's relationship to Dragon Lord Placidusax, the ancient multi-headed dragon boss found in the timeless space of crumbling Farum Azula. Bayle was a traitor to the Dragon Order, he who broke from the Lords and established his own dominion. His fire and lightning, distinct from all other dragons, is the expression of that independence, of a power that refused to align with any existing authority. Placidusax's missing heads are, the priestess implies, Bayle's work. Violence visited upon the Dragon Lord by the one who rejected everything the Dragon Lord represented. At the summit, past the ancient dragon Sanisax and the final guardian drakes, the arena opens and Bayle is there. He is enormous. He fills the arena the way a storm fills a valley, not just with physical size, but with the specific atmospheric pressure of something that has been here a very long time and considers this space its own in every meaningful sense. His fire is black and crackling with lightning, a combination unlike any other dragon in the game, and the one that gives Bayle his specific identity as a creature of independent power. The lore surrounding the dragon communion tradition suggests this darkness and storm energy, carried in Bayle's burned hearts over generations, is what shaped the visual language of what Drake warriors could eventually express through their incantations. The red lightning, the black fire, the particular aesthetic of consuming something that refused all authority. He has a second phase that transforms the fight in ways that are genuinely shocking the first time you see them, expanding the arena's threat in every direction, simultaneously. And then you place the summon sign. Igon appears, and Igon does not approach this fight the way summons typically approach fights, as support, as distraction, as a supplemental damage source that works methodically at the task. Igon approaches the fight the way Igon approaches everything, with total commitment and the full weight of everything he has been holding since the last time he was here. And he begins to speak. He curses Bayle. Not generally, not in the composed tones of heroic battle narration. He curses Bayle specifically, naming what Bayle is and what he has done, and exactly what the reckoning looks like that he has been maintaining his existence in order to deliver. He calls for a rain of harpoons, hurling them in his mind with the force of a man who has been rehearsing this speech on the side of a road for however long he has been lying there. He demands Bayle face what he cannot face. He screams and fights and does not stop screaming. The voice acting for Igon in the Bayle fight is the thing people remember. It is the specific achievement that players who encounter it most often cite, sometimes in terms that surprise themselves. Not that it is good voice acting in the technical sense, but that it communicates something they did not expect a video game to communicate. The sound of a person who has been kept alive by a single purpose for a long time, who is finally in the room where that purpose can be fulfilled, who has nothing left to preserve, who is spending everything. When Bayle falls, Igon's reaction is not triumph in the clean, heroic sense. It is release, the sound of something that was being held at enormous cost for a very long time, simply no longer needing to be held. Return to where Igon last was on the mountain, and he is gone. His belongings are there, his great bow, his armor, the things he carried across the impossible mountain to the fight he had been building toward. He got there. He finished what he came for. And in the particular way of this game's approach to characters, not explaining, not narrating, simply presenting the outcome and letting it settle. What remains tells you everything about what ending looks like for a person like Igon. The Dragon Communion Priestess, if you have found her and spoken to her in the correct order before Bayle's death, offers one more piece of the puzzle, a choice about a heart, a divergence in the quest line, an additional reward or alternative path depending on the decisions you make. The specifics of this branch connect to the broader Dragon Communion tradition and to what Bayle's death means for that tradition going forward. The Dragon Communion was always aimed at this moment. The hearts consumed by every practitioner in history, the power accumulated over generations of draconic hunting. All of it was preparation. And now the preparation is complete. The purpose is fulfilled. And whoever inherits the tradition carries forward something that just achieved what it was always reaching for. The lore of Bayle's connection to Dragon Lord Placidusax also rewards consideration in light of what Igon's victory means. Placidusax lost heads to Bayle. Those missing necks on the ancient Dragon Lord in crumbling Farum Azula are wounds from a traitor within the Dragon Order's own ranks. Bayle broke away from the Dragon Order, established his own dominion, turned on his own kin with the specific violence of apostasy rather than external conquest. His fire and lightning, the combination that makes him so distinctive among ancient dragons, is the expression of that independence. Power that refused to align, that refused the authority of the order he came from. In killing Bayle, you complete a justice that the Dragon Order itself could never complete. The traitor is finally punished. The wounds he dealt to Placidusax are finally answered. The apostasy is finally resolved. Igon did not know any of this. He did not go to the jagged peak to settle a cosmic debt. But that is what his arrival accomplished, layered beneath the personal story. The way this game's best moments always carry more weight than the people involved in them can fully perceive. The Dragonkin soldier of Siofra River. Siofra River is where Elden Ring first reveals that the world has depth in the literal sense, that beneath the surface of the lands between, beneath the fields and ruins and dungeons of the upper world, there are other worlds entirely. You step into the elevator at the Siofra River Well, a stone structure in the mistwood of eastern Limgrave, and it descends for longer than it has any right to. And when the doors finally open, you emerge into a cavern so enormous that your sense of scale inverts. The ceiling is far enough above you that it approximates a sky. The space stretches to the edges of visibility in every direction, filled with the blue-white glow of thousands of bioluminescent plants and fungi, lit like a world that chose a different primary color for its light. Ancient stone towers rise from the cavern floor. Water runs somewhere beneath everything, audible but not visible. It is beautiful in the specific way of places that have been tended carefully for a very long time, by things that understood what they were tending. The ancestral followers who inhabit this underground region are the most immediately striking thing about Siofra River as an experience. They are grey-skinned and long-limbed, carrying the air of a people organized entirely around something sacred, performing rituals in the presence of great deer-form bone constructions that the game identifies as connected to the ancestral spirit, the great magical entity that the followers serve and protect. To summon the spirit and fight it, you light 8 braziers scattered through the region, while avoiding the spectral warriors with enormous bows, who guard the space with long-range, lethal accuracy. The ancestral spirit boss fight, when you reach it, is one of the most visually distinctive encounters in the game. After it ends, most players take the elevator back to Limgrave. They miss the Waygate in the north. In the northern reaches of Siofra River, past the ancestral followers and the stone stairways leading up toward the Hallowhorn grounds, there is a broken pillar. It leans against the cliff face at the eastern edge of the region. It does not look different from the other broken stone structures scattered throughout the cavern. There is nothing on the main map path or in the dungeon's progression logic that directs you toward it. But at its base, barely distinguishable from the stone and the bioluminescent plant light, is a circular portal, a waygate, one of the arcane transportation circles that appear throughout Elden Ring to connect distant or otherwise inaccessible points. An ancestral follower archer stands near it. Whether guarding or coincident, the game does not specify. Step through the waygate and you appear on a plateau above the main Siofra basin, elevated, looking down over the cavern you came from at an angle that transforms familiar geometry into something new. The plateau is open and flat, lit by the same blue-white bioluminescence from below, and in its center, there is a basin of dark water, and in the water, a large figure is collapsed. The Dragonkin soldier does not move at first. It is lying in the shallow dark water with the total stillness of something that has been here for a very long time, in a state that is neither sleep nor death, in any ordinary sense, but something specific to creatures of this lineage. A threshold condition, a suspended readiness. When you approach closely enough, the process of rising begins. It is slow. The enormous limbs find the bottom of the basin. The body lifts by degrees. The scale of the creature becomes apparent as it reaches its full height, and by that point, the lightning is already building in the space around its hands, crackling in the way of something that has always known how to produce this particular phenomenon. The Dragonkin soldiers are not dragons, and this distinction carries lore weight. They were created by the Nox, the people of the Eternal Cities, as attempts to replicate the ancient dragons, to emulate the power of beings the Nox could not naturally become. The item descriptions tell it plainly. The Dragonkin were born in the Eternal City, where they knew no true sky nor true lightning. Instead, ice lightning was their weapon. They never attained immortality, and perished as decrepit, pale imitations of their skyborn kin. They are not devotees who chose proximity to draconic power. They are crafted things built from gravelstone by the Nox, in a failed attempt at replication. What happens when a people with extraordinary ambition tries to build the divine from the materials at hand and discovers that the result is a diminishment of what they were reaching for? Finding one here, in the hidden upper reaches of Siofra River, behind a waygate that most players never discover, raises the question of why. The Eternal Cities are full of ancient things. Things preserved from ages that the surface world has moved past. Things maintained in the underground with the fidelity that suggests either extraordinary dedication or the simple fact that nothing reached this deep to disturb them. The Dragonkin soldiers in the underground are among the most ancient-feeling encounters in the game. They predate the current world's political arrangements. They come from the era of the dragons, the time before the Golden Order established what power was supposed to look like. Finding one collapsed in a hidden basin in the upper reaches of Siofra River, accessible only by a waygate at the base of a broken pillar, suggests a specific placement rather than a random presence. Something was put here, or came here, for reasons connected to the Eternal City's relationship with draconic power that the game does not entirely illuminate. The dragon halberd that the Dragonkin drops is a weapon from the old world, scaling with the arcane statistics that connect to draconic and primordial power, carrying the ice lightning of the Eternal City, the artificial substitute for the true lightning of the skyborn dragons that the Nox never had access to. Obtaining it is in some sense obtaining a piece of the age that built these underground cities, an artifact of the time when draconic devotion and sorcerous ambition were the defining practices of the world's most significant civilizations. Most players who explore Siofra River fully enough to reach and defeat the ancestral spirit do not explore its northeastern edge carefully enough to find the pillar. There is also the question of what the Dragonkin's presence means for the Siofra River as a whole. The Eternal City, ruins that sit above the underground basin, the towers, the stone architecture, the Hallowhorn grounds with their ceremonial deer construct, are associated with the ancestral followers, a people organized around a spiritual tradition that honors something older than the current age's categories. The ancestral spirit they serve is a creature of ancient magic, assembled from bones and given the form of a great deer, connected to the concept of ancestor veneration and the preservation of old forms. The Dragonkin soldiers are also ancient beings, also connected to traditions that predate the current order. Their coexistence in the same underground space, the followers in the lower basin, the Dragonkin on the upper plateau, suggests a layered history for Siofra River. Different occupants from different eras, each maintaining their particular connection to the old world in the particular space the old world left them. The Siofra River well, the simple stone structure in Limgrave's Mistwood that leads to all of this, is one of Elden Ring's most underrated design choices. It looks like a minor dungeon entrance. It is positioned in a forest area that most players pass through on the way from the Mistwood ruins to other objectives, and the elevator inside it descends far enough that players unfamiliar with From Software's dungeons might expect to emerge in a small underground area with a handful of enemies and a chest. What they find instead is a world. The well is a gate to somewhere that has the same physical scope as the surface regions, the same sense of things having existed here long before you arrived, the same layered history visible in the architecture. The Siofra River is not a dungeon. It is a place. The Dragonkin soldier accessible through its hidden way gate is not a side boss. It is an encounter in a world that exists beneath the world you started in a space that is as complete and as ancient as anything above it. The visual quality of the upper plateau fight is itself worth noting, because From Software's environments are rarely arbitrary in their aesthetic choices. The plateau looks down over the main Siofra basin. You can see the blue-white glow of the bioluminescent plants below, the distant shapes of the ancestral towers, the scale of the underground world from an angle that the ground-level exploration never provides. Fighting the Dragonkin soldier up here with that view below you gives the encounter a sense of elevation that is not just spatial, but perspectival. You are seeing the underground world from above. You are in the hidden upper register of a place that most visitors only know from below, and in the shallow basin of dark water at the center of that elevated plateau, a creature built by the Nox in their hunger to reach the sky that was taken from them. A failed imitation of the very dragons that Astel's punishment denied them, is rising from its rest to meet you. The waygate at the pillar's base is the thread that connects these layers. Someone built it to provide access to the upper plateau. Someone considered the upper plateau worth accessing. In a dungeon, where everything else flows downward through a natural topography of descent, the waygate creates an upward movement, a deliberate elevation to a specific point. Whatever was on that plateau, whoever was stationed there, whatever was stored or practiced or maintained in that dark basin, it was considered important enough to require regular access by a route that most visitors would never find. The Dragonkin soldier, collapsed in the water, waited. Perhaps it waited from before the shattering. Perhaps it waited from before the current age of the Erdtree entirely, from the era when dragons and their servants were the defining powers of the world, and the underground cities were places of genuine significance, rather than relics. The game does not tell you how long it has been here. The water does not tell you. The blue-white bioluminescent light from below, filtering up to the plateau in the way that light filters through water, creating the impression of looking at the sky from the bottom of a lake. None of this tells you. The Dragonkin is simply here, as ancient things simply are, in the place they were placed or the place they chose, holding their readiness against the day when someone finds the waygate and climbs to meet them. The waygate is small. The plateau above it, if it were visible from below, would appear simply to be the cliff face continuing. The Dragonkin soldier in its dark basin is waiting for precisely the kind of player Siofra River is designed for. One who treats the underground as a world rather than a dungeon, who walks the edges, who looks at the broken pillar and wonders what is at its base. Crucible Knight, Stormhill, Evergaol. On the western edge of Stormhill, where the road climbs north toward the enormous gate of Stormhill Castle, and the sky has the permanent grey quality of a region that exists under siege, there is a circular stone platform set into the hillside. Its design is specific to anyone who has seen one before. The concentric rings of carved stone, the architectural vocabulary of binding and containment, the quality of the space above it that suggests a pocket of reality that is adjacent to, but not identical with its surroundings. It is an Evergaol. Most players in this area of the game are either following the path to Stormhill or dealing with the soldiers and trolls that guard the hill's approaches, and the platform to the west is easy to pass as simply part of the landscape. It looks like an old structure. Limgrave is full of old structures. You step onto it, you interact with the binding circle at its center, and you are inside the Evergaol. The outside world is replaced by a contained grey space, bounded and silent, where the architecture of the binding circle is reproduced in 3 dimensions around you. The Crucible Knight is already facing you. He has been here since before you arrived. He has been here since before anyone now living can remember. For players who find this Evergaol early, and it is reachable in the very first hour of the game, before almost any other meaningful encounter, before equipment has been upgraded or stats built toward any particular purpose. The Crucible Knight is one of the most demanding and most clarifying encounters in the game. He is fully armored in the distinctive red gold plate of his order, carrying a greatsword and shield with the practiced ease of someone who has performed this specific combination of actions more times than he could count. He has near infinite poise for the level where he is encountered. He telegraphs his attacks with the unhurried deliberateness of a warrior who has stopped needing to surprise anyone because his mastery of the timing makes surprise unnecessary. He reads your dodges not through prediction, but through recognition. He has seen this before many times, and he knows what you're going to do because everyone does what you're going to do. His second phase begins at approximately 60% health, and it introduces the elements that make Crucible Knights iconic throughout Elden Ring's combat landscape. The wings, golden, enormous, erupting from his back mid-fight, giving him additional aerial attack options and a mobile speed that seems wrong for something this heavily armored. And then the tail, the great beast's tail that sweeps from behind him in a horizontal arc that catches every player at least once, because it comes from a direction that the front-facing combat focus consistently underserves. The Crucible Knights served Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, in the founding era of the current world. Their history is one of the game's most significant historical threads, because it tells you what the Erdtree and the Golden Order were before they became what they are in the game's present. The armor descriptions are precise. The Crucible Knights hold the power of the Crucible of Life, the primordial form of the Erdtree. In time, the strength shown by these knights, and even their appearance, was seen as chaotic and deserving of scorn. The primordial life state that the Crucible represents, the undifferentiated potential, the condition in which all biological forms were possible before the Golden Order decided which forms were sacred and which were transgressive, is the foundation that Godfrey's fighters carried in their bodies and their incantations. They could grow tails, they could grow wings, they could manifest the horns of ancient creatures. These were not merely combat abilities, they were the expression of a connection to the Erdtree's original nature. And the Golden Order eventually found this intolerable. The institution that the Crucible Knights helped establish grew more precise, more restrictive, more committed to a specific vision of what sanctioned life looked like. The animal aspects, the primal forms, the physical evidence of connection to a pre-order state, these things became uncomfortable to an institution that had decided on a more limited definition of the sacred. The Crucible Knights who once served the Founding Lord found themselves classified as chaotic, as requiring scorn, as belonging to something the Order was trying to move past. This Evergaol is the consequence of someone making that judgment about this specific knight. We do not know his name, or his offense, or what particular authority bound him here. The binding was performed by someone, at some point, for some reason, that satisfied whoever performed it, and then everything else continued to happen. Godfrey was exiled. The shattering occurred. Lendel fell into its preserved siege state. Margit, later understood to be Morgoth, became the guardian of the road to Stormhill. And the Crucible Knight remained in the Evergaol, unchanging, in a grey bounded space outside of time, still holding the readiness he has always held, still facing the entrance with the same quality of attention he has maintained since he was imprisoned here. The Stormhill location of the Evergaol is worth considering in terms of what it means for the game's pacing and structure. This is not a late-game discovery. This is something you can find on your first morning in the Lands Between, before the first dungeon, before any significant power has been accumulated. The game places an encounter with one of its deepest historical threads, the founding age of the Erd Tree, the rejection of primal power, the Crucible Knight tradition, in the very first region, available to anyone willing to approach a stone circle on a hill and step inside. The message this sends, intentionally or not, is that the world's deep history is not reserved for those who complete the main story. It is present from the beginning. The ancient things are here from the moment you arrive. Limgrave is not a simple starting zone. It is a starting zone that happens to also contain, on a hill to the west of the road, to Stormhill, a prisoner from the Founding Age who is still fighting by the rules of an order that no longer exists. Before the aspect of the Crucible, Tale, there is the matter of what you see when the second phase begins and the wings emerge. The wings of the Crucible Knight are golden and enormous, and they carry a visual implication that the game never states directly. These are the same wings that appear in the aspects of the Crucible incantation of that name, the primal feathered form that predates any specific species of winged creature in the current world's taxonomy. They are not bird wings or dragon wings or angel wings in the conventional sense. They are the wings of the Crucible itself, the form that life took before the current order decided which forms were sacred and which were monstrous. Seeing them erupt from a fully armoured knight in the confined grey space of the Evergaol is a specific and striking kind of dissonance. This armoured warrior, gold-plated and sword-wielding, is also partly something else entirely. The primordial aspects are not separate from the knight. They are the knight. They always were. The aspect of the Crucible, tale that he drops on defeat, is properly understood, an inheritance rather than a reward. It is what this knight carries, what was built into him, what the Crucible Knights embodied as a class, what the Golden Order wanted to suppress. By defeating him, you receive the means to manifest it yourself. The primordial beast tale, generated by incantation, sweeping across the ground with the force of a creature that existed before the current age decided what creatures were acceptable. You carry forward what the Order tried to contain. He faces you every time someone enters the Evergaol. He fights with everything he has each time, because that is all there is for him. The fight, the readiness, the skill accumulated over a life spent in service of a lord who was exiled before the world remembers. Patient beyond patience, in a grey space outside time, on a hillside in Limgrave, where most people are looking at the castle and have no particular reason to notice the stone platform to the west. The broader context for the Crucible Knight's imprisonment throughout the lands between is one of the game's quietest historical tragedies. These are beings who helped build something, who gave their power and their devotion to the founding of an order, and who were gradually excluded from that order as it refined itself into something their nature made incompatible with. The arc from Godfrey's valued knights to imprisoned embarrassments follows a logic that the game's history supports in multiple places. The things that build systems are often the first things those systems classify as threats, once the systems are stable enough to start defining what belongs and what does not. The Stormhill Knight is the earliest version of this history that most players encounter. The first Crucible Knight, the first Evergaol, the first physical evidence of what happens when ancient power is deemed too chaotic for the current age's aesthetics. He is here in Limgrave, at the beginning of everything, for a player who starts the game in the stranded graveyard below the Stormhill Evergaol and climbs up into the world for the first time. He is the first layer of the world's deep history available to anyone paying attention. Before Stormvale, before the first Legacy dungeon, before almost any other significant encounter, there is a stone circle on a hill in Limgrave, and inside it a knight from the Founding Age is waiting. Patient as everything that has been waiting longer than it wanted to, for someone to step through the binding and find out what was imprisoned here and why it was worth imprisoning. When you defeat him and take the aspect he carries, you inherit something the Golden Order spent generations trying to suppress. The primal tale sweeps from you now. The ancient form is in you. And on the hillside outside the Evergaol, the stone circle sits in the grey light of Stormhill, still binding the space it was built to bind, still holding the shape of the prison even with its occupant defeated. The architecture of containment outlasts the thing it contained, which is, in its way, the most honest statement the game makes about the institutions that built these prisons. They are very good at maintaining the shape of what they decided needed containing, long past the moment when anyone needs the shape to serve its original purpose. Crucible, Night Siluria, the Deeproot Depths. To reach the Deeproot Depths, you have to descend through layers of the underground that require specific knowledge to navigate. The most direct path runs through the Siofra Aqueduct, a flooded underground passage that connects the Asle river system to a lower region, and it ends at a boss fight against the valiant gargoyle duo, two stone statue warriors who operate in coordination with the particular cruelty of a game that likes its duo fights to demand the management of two completely independent threats simultaneously. Past the gargoyles, in their arena, there is a coffin. You lie in it. The current carries you. When you emerge, you are somewhere else. Alternatively, there is a false wall. It is in the boss room of Morg the Omen. Not Mol, Lord of Blood, the remembrance boss of Mogwyn Palace, but the lesser Mog who inhabits the subterranean shunning grounds beneath Lindell, accessible through a drainage system that most players descend into once to complete a specific questline and never return to. The false wall in Mog the Omen's room reveals a passage that bypasses the gargoyles entirely, leading directly to the Deeproot Depths by a hidden route that the game places no markers toward and provides no hints about. To find it, you hit walls in a boss room after the boss is dead, which is not a behavior most players practice as a matter of course. What you find in the Deeproot depths justifies both methods of getting there. The cavern is among Elden Ring's most extraordinary spaces, enormous in scale, partially flooded, lit by a pale golden-white luminescence that comes not from plants or fungi, but from the roots themselves. The Erdtree's root system extends through the rock here, filling the space from ceiling to floor and back, the colossal tendrils of divine wood threading through stone in patterns that are simultaneously random-seeming and purposeful. This is where the Erdtree's foundations actually exist. This is the underground physical reality of the divine tree that defines the surface world's sacred geography. Walking among these roots, underneath their enormous slow weight, lit by the light they generate simply by being what they are, carries a specific atmospheric register that nothing else in the game quite matches. In a hall deeper in the region, past the Crucible beetles and the ambient sounds of very slow organic growth, the space opens up. And standing in the center of it, with a tree spear resting in her grip, is Siluria. She is a Crucible Knight, and she is the only one who carries this specific weapon. The tree spear is fashioned from the Erdtree's wood, a weapon that honors the living tree rather than the warrior tradition, that names the Crucible in its generative aspect rather than its martial one. Her armor bears the great tree ornamentation that marks her as the leader of her faction, the knight whose name was taken by her order, whose tree-focused tradition is distinct from the axe and shield tradition of Ordovis's faction that honors Godfrey the First Lord directly. Siluria and her knights chose the tree as their symbol, the life that the Crucible represents expressed not as combat but as growth, not as force but as becoming. Finding her here, at the physical root of the Erdtree itself, is the most specifically placed encounter in the game. The Crucible Knights were born from the primordial form of the Erdtree's power, and over time were rejected by the institution that power supported. Most of them are scattered, imprisoned, or reduced to echoes. The duo of Auriza is guarding an ancient grave. The Stormhill Knight is imprisoned in an Evergaol. The ones in Spirit Caller Caves are summoned ghosts, already long dead. But Siluria is here, at the root of the thing she served, holding the weapon that honors it. Still present in the deepest physical space of the world's most central sacred structure, standing vigil in a hall that the vast majority of players will never find. The fight is demanding in the manner specific to Crucible Knights. The commitment to each swing, the follow-through that punishes impatient counterattacks. The second phase that introduces the aspects of the Crucible, the wings, the tail, and makes the question of range and positioning suddenly more complicated. The arena adds to this the challenge of the roots themselves, which frame the encounter and occasionally interact with the edges of the fight in ways that the flat arenas of other Crucible Knight encounters do not produce. There is also a quality to Siluria's tree spear that distinguishes her combat from the sword and shield style of her order's other knights. The spear creates range that a sword does not have, and it has a specific sweeping quality suited to wide arcs across open space. But it also has a thrusting quality for closer range engagements that transitions between the two modes faster than the weapon's reach might suggest. She fights the way someone fights when they have been practicing alone in a large hall with nothing but the roots for company, developing a style that accounts for the space she has rather than the opponents she has not been facing. The tree spear is also quieter than a greatsword. The swings do not produce the same percussive impacts. She moves with a quality that the roots seem to complement. The same pale glow, the same unhurried growth, the same patience expressed through form rather than force. But what the encounter is really about is location. The Deeproot depths is connected to Fia, the deathbed companion, to Godwyn the Golden, who rests here in a state of partial death that the game calls something between dying and not dying, to the deathroot that grows in the dark and the tradition of the Duskborn that accumulated around it. All of this is elsewhere in the region. Siluria is her own story within this space, separate from the other narratives the Deeproot depths carries. She is the Crucible Knight at the root of the Crucible, the warrior who chose the tree, standing in the tree's own foundations, the ancient guardian whose tradition was built around the living aspect of the Erdtree's primordial power, stationed in the place where that power is most physically present, the institution above her on the surface, the Golden Order that eventually regarded her kind as chaotic and deserving of scorn, has no presence here. The administrators and politicians and theologians who refined the Erdtree's authority into something that required the suppression of primal forms, they are all on the surface, in the light, running the world that the Crucible Knights helped build and then were excluded from. Down here the roots grow. Down here the pale golden light is the color of something that predates the current order's aesthetic choices. Down here Siluria has been holding her post in the hall of the thing she devoted herself to, and no order of scorn has reached her here, and she has been doing what she was made to do in the deepest room of the world for as long as the tree has been growing its foundations into the dark. The Crucible Axe armor set that Siluria's tradition is associated with, found elsewhere in the game, carries the description that tells us the Crucible Knights were eventually seen as chaotic and deserving of scorn. But the Crucible tree armor that Siluria and her specific faction wear has its own description, and it notes the great tree ornamentation as Siluria's mark, displayed also by her men. There is something in the phrase displayed also by her men that is worth sitting with. She is the center of a tradition. The tree symbol belongs to her first. Her soldiers carry it as an expression of their relationship to her, not merely to the abstract tradition she represents. Siluria is not simply an instance of a type. She is the source. Finding her here at the roots of the very tree her armor honors is a statement of a kind that this game makes with placement rather than dialogue. She is exactly where she should be, not where the current world assigned her, not where the Golden Order, in its scorn for what she represented, would have put her. Where she should be, if the world were organized around meaning rather than around the preferences of an institution that found ancient power inconvenient. The game does not say this. It simply puts her here, in the Hall of the Foundations, and lets the location speak. She falls like a knight falls, complete at once, with the specific weight of everything she carried, and the roots go on, and the light continues, and somewhere above, in a world that moved on from what she represents without quite being able to replace it, the Erdtree burns in its corruption, and does not know who is keeping its foundations tended in the dark.